Want to learn how to build a stunning, responsive landing page using HTML and CSS? In this video, I will guide you step by step through the process of designing a professional work landing page that looks great on any device. Whether you are a beginner or looking to sharpen your web development skills, this tutorial will give you everything you need to bring your ideas to life. In this video, we are going to build the Upwork landing page and we are going to make it responsive. That is, it's going to look great on any device. You will learn how to structure a landing page with HTML, how to create a responsive layout. Okay, so we are going to look at the techniques for ensuring your landing page looks great on desktops, tablets, and mobile devices using responsive design. We are going to level up our CSS and learn different tricks you need to know as a front-end developer. We are going to see how to effectively use CSS Flexbox or Grid to create flexible, responsive layouts that adjust to different screen devices. We are going to look at tools and techniques to test our landing page on different devices and browsers for responsiveness. And finally, we are going to write semantic organized HTML and CSS. So we are going to look at best practices for clean code as a front-end developer. Let me walk you through the finished project. This is the landing page we are going to build by the end of this video. We are going to start by building this hero section, and we have this talent section. Then we have this enterprise, the client section, we have the wise section. Also, we are going to build this amazing footer components. This project simplifies advanced concepts of HTML and CSS. This website is also fully responsive. So on small devices, we are going to have something like this. Okay. Let's start this project by creating our project folder. I am currently on my desktop. Here, I'm going to create a folder and I'm going to call this Upwork project. Next, let's open this folder in our code editor. And for this project, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. If you don't have a code editor installed, you can open any browser. Let's go to Google Chrome and here simply type Visual Studio Code. And this will bring you to this page. Just open up this first option and you will find a link to download this code editor. Great. Once you have a code editor, if you're on Windows, right-click on this folder and you will see an option to open with your code editor. If you're on Mac, you can simply drag and drop this folder into your code editor. Great. So here is our project folder. Right inside this project folder, you will see this particular icon. So this first one is to create a new file, and this is to create a folder. So let's use the first one and create a new file, which we are going to call index.html. Good. Now let's create another file and let's call this styles.css. So this first one is our HTML document, and this is going to hold our styles. So this is for CSS and this is our HTML file. Great. Let's look at what we call a standard HTML file structure. So let's start this project by first adding the doc type. We use less than, exclamation mark, doc type. This doc type declaration defines the document type and version of the HTML being used. So the next thing we are going to do now is to add the HTML element. To do this, we use the less than HTML. and we close this. So this is the opening tag and here is the closing tag. This HTML element is the root element of our HTML document and is going to wrap every other content on the web page. The HTML element takes an attribute and this we call the lang, which is the language. And here let's use the en, which is the English. Okay, this is very important because this helps search engines and also screen readers to understand the language used in the content. Okay, we simply use this to specify the language of our HTML document. Inside this HTML element, we now need to add two important things. The first is what we call the head, so the opening tag and also the closing tag. And the second one is what we call the body. Every HTML document must contain these two elements. It's very important. It's not optional. It's not optional. Every HTML element must have a head and a body. A question is, what actually is the difference between these two things? The body element is going to contain the actual content of our web page, while the head element contains metadata and information about the document that is not directly visible to the user. So every information here ends. The head is simply going to contain information about our HTML document. This includes settings and resources that is going to influence the entire page. Things like title, things like links, everything is going to be included in this head part. Okay. Now let's understand this in details. Now, if you look at our finished project, everything here from this session, everything, this is the body. Okay. Now, if you look at this up, notice this particular icon, and also this is what we call the title. Upwork, this here is the title. And this icon is also coming from the head part. Okay, all these are coming from the head parts. Why this is the body of our HTML document. I hope this is clear enough. Great. Now let's proceed. In this head section, for now, let's simply add the title element. So we call it title, and let's close this element. Here, let's write Upwork, the world's work marketplace. In our body, for now, let's simply add a paragraph. We do that using the P tag. And here, let's say hello world. Let's save this file. Good. Now, if we go to the browser, we see our finished project. But how can we run this particular project? Now, we can go to our desktop where we curated the folder. Let's open this folder and we are going to see this index.html file. If you're on Windows, you can right click on this and you see an option to open this with the Google Chrome. And this is our website. Great. Now notice the head and also the body. You see that the main part here is the body of our HTML document, and the head contains simply the title for now. Okay, good. In this course, we are going to need some extension. For example, if we add something else here and save this file, let's go back to the browser. You notice that we do not see the change here. To see the change, we have to refresh this page. For the purpose of this course, we are going to add an extension. And with that extension, we don't have to click this icon before we see any change. So when we change anything here and save this file, it's going to update the browser automatically. And we do that by coming to this particular icon, extensions, simply type live server. Okay, open this first option and here you're going to see install. I already have it installed. So simply click on install. Once you finish installing that, you are going to see an icon down here which says go live. Simply click on that go live icon and this opens our web page. So let's simply close this first one. And now if we come here and remove this and type auto, save this file and go back to the page, you simply see auto. Great. If this is your first time working with HTML, let's add one extension, and this is called Prettier. Okay, just open this first one, Prettier Code Formatter, and click install. This is simply going to format our document. For instance, if I add something here, let's say a paragraph, and I type something here, now, look at what happens when I save this file. This is going to be indented. So this is going to shift this to this. You see, making everything neat. This is simply what Prettier does. Back in the head, let's add some metadata. We do this using the meta tag. This is a self-closing element. If you look at this title, we have the opening and the closing. In the case of this, there is nothing like a closing tag. It's simply a self-closing tag. So in HTML, we have a self-closing tag and we have tags that have both the opening and the closing tags. Those are the two major categories. This meta tag is essential for providing the browser with important information about how to render our web page. So for this first one, let's add the char set, which is the character set. And let's use the standard UTF-8. This UTF-8 is the universal character encoding standard, and it supports almost all characters from different languages and symbol. Let's add another one, and this is going to take the HTTP equiv attribute, and this is XUA compatible. Do not be overwhelmed with this. You don't have to cram any of these things. In fact, we can generate all this using a shortcut, but I just wanted us to simply understand this basic structure. Okay. This simply ensures that the web page is rendered using the latest version of Internet Explorer. Okay. This HTTP equiv sets HTTP header equivalent to a specific value. In this case, we are going to set the XAU compatible header to IE Internet Explorer Edge. Okay. Here we say content to be IE, and we say this equals to Edge. What does this mean? IE equals Edge tells Internet Explorer to use the latest rendering engine available rather than falling back to an older version of Internet Explorer. This simply avoids compatibility issues with the older version of Internet Explorer. The last one is going to be something that does with devices. Okay, so let's do this method, and this is going to take the name attribute, and we call this viewport, and then we set the content to be equal to width equals device width, and initial scale is equal to 1.0. This simply controls the viewport size and scale. What exactly do I mean? This is going to make our HTML document fit into any device. So it's going to help our document to display correctly on all devices. And by devices, I mean mobile phone, desktop, laptop, etc. For now, this is all we are going to have in this head session. We are going to fill it up as we go on with the project. So for this body, the next thing we are going to do is to look at what we call semantic HTML. So basically here we are not going to start by using div, no, because div is simply a container. We are going to build this project bearing accessibility and screen readers in mind, because this is very important in your career as a front end developer. So here in the body, we are going to do something. This part, okay, this is going to be a component on its own, and we are going to call this the header, okay? This is going to be the header, all this part, okay? So this is going to be a component, and we are going to call this the header component. And this is going to be another component, and this is going to be like a sub nav, okay? We are going to see this very soon. This path is going to be a component, and we are going to call this the hero session. Okay, this is going to be our hero session. And every other part on the page, we are going to take them component by component. So what we are going to do is to call this part the header. We call this part another session. This is going to be our hero session. This is going to be the talent session. This is going to be enterprise session. So this is a session, and we use this as our footer. So this is going to be footer. So everything on this page, apart from this header, this is going to be the header. This part is going to be the main part of our document. As you see, this is the main part, and this is simply the footer. With this information, I hope you understand how the structure of this document is going to look like. Let's go to the code and see this in action. In the body, we now have header. We have what we call the header tag. An HTML element consists of an opening tag, which is this, the closing tag, which is this, and the contents, which is what we have here. So everything here is what we call the element. This is just a clarification, so you don't get confused when I say a tag or an element. Great. So we can remove this for now. The next thing we are going to have is what we call the main, okay? And finally, we have the footer. Okay, so this is from what we saw on the web page in the finished project. When we are building a real world application professionally, every standard HTML document should actually be structured this way. So you see now that the HTML elements, this is the opening tag and this is the closing tag, wraps every other element. It wraps every other thing in our document. Then we have this head, okay, which contains just metadata. It contains information. Then we have our body, which contains the main content. So the main content of our web page is going to be here. Notice this is head and this is header. This is different from this, okay? This header, main, footer, they are all semantic HTML elements. What do we mean by semantic HTML elements? Semantic HTML elements convey meaning about the content they wrap, okay? This header represents the header section of a document. This is very important because when you are building an application, for instance, you need to have all users in mind, screen readers, everybody. If, for instance, a blind person visits your website, the blind person is going to use what we call a screen reader. So semantic HTML makes it easier for them to understand because this header element is simply going to tell them that everything inside me is the header part of this document. And the main is going to tell them, oh, these are the main contents of the web page. And of course, they are going to know that, oh, this is the footer. Okay. So this is the difference between the semantic HTML and non-semantic HTML elements. Great. Please, if you are comfortable working with HTML and you already know all this, you can simply skip this part of the video and continue with the project. I felt it's very important to understand this basic structure of HTML document. We are going to start this project by building this hero session. So remember that this hero session is going to be inside the main element because it's actually the main part. Great. Let's start this project with this hero session. Okay. So inside the main, we are going to use another semantic HTML element called session. Okay, just as the name implies, it's going to, instead of using div, so we have what we call div, which we are going to see very soon. A div does not convey any meaning, it's simply a container. Okay, that's why most times we try as much as possible to use a semantic element instead of using div. Okay, so inside this session, let's go back to the finished project. If you look at this hero component, we can further divide it into sub-components. So this image is going to be a part. Let's call this maybe part 2 and call this test part 1. Okay, so this part is going to be part 1. Trying to explain this so that when we get to styling this page, it's going to be very simple. And just by building this particular hero section, you'll be able to build any hero section of any website on your own. Just open any professional website and try building the hero section on your own. This is very simple. First, let's add the container, and remember that is going to be a div. Let's simply give this div the class. I'm going to explain this further when we want to style the page. Call this hero container. Okay. Now inside this hero container, we are going to have two more containers. One container for the text part and one container for the image. So this is going to be div. And let's give this a class, which we are going to call the hero left content. Okay, so we call it. Now let's add the second div. Remember, this is going to contain the image. So we simply call this the hero image. Very simple. So inside the first one, we are going to add the heading of our web page using the heading tag. The heading tags, we have H1, H2, H3 to H6. The H1 represent the highest level heading. Okay, that's the highest level heading. Here we simply say how work should work. And here we see how work should work. Within this content, we can use another tag, which is the BR. So this is simply going to move this should work to the next line. Okay, this is simply a line break. If you look at the page again, you now see this. Great. So after the H1, let's now add our paragraph. So we can simply copy this and let's paste it here. After the paragraph, let's add a button. So we also have the button element, and it is not a self-closing, so it also have the closing tag. For this button, let's write get started. Let's give it class btn. Note that an element can have more than one class. So here I can also say btn primary. Okay, so this particular button now have class btn and class btn primary. Now, this our session element, let's also give it a class and let's call this container. Good. Now, inside the second div, let's now add our image. How do we add an image? We add an image simply by using the img attribute. Okay. And the image is a self-closing. Okay. So the image, we can't write it this way. We can do something like this. This is wrong. The image is a self-closing element. So we do this. Okay. But the image works with two important attributes. The first one is what we call src, which is going to specify the source of this image. Okay. And the second one is the auth, which is very important for screen readers to understand what exactly is being displayed on our page. Okay, good. Now let's open this. You can toggle this path. Okay, if you want the full screen, you can use this. And you can also use Command B. I think that should be Control B on Windows, but on Mac, it's Command B. Okay, Great. Now, if you look at this, we don't have any image folder. Just a note, you can actually use an image hosted online. For instance, we can go to the browser, okay? Let's say on Splash. So you've opened this first option. This is just a website where we can simply get free images. And you can click on any image. For instance, this, you can right click on this and you see this option, copy image address. So you can copy the image address and paste that here, save the file, and let's go back to our own page. And here you see this image. In this, we are using an image hosted online, okay? But for the purpose of this project, we don't actually want this. We want to create a folder here, which is going to contain our image, okay? So here, let's come here and create a folder. Let's call this assets, okay? So inside this asset, we are now going to create an image folder. Now, in the finished project, you see that we have several images. To make life easier for us, I have saved all these images in a particular folder. So all you do, please go to the comment section of this video, and there in the description, you are going to see a link, a GitHub link. When you click on that link, it's going to bring you to this GitHub page, okay? So this GitHub page contains a repo, a repository, which contains the projects we are working on. For now, we have this starter folder, which contains all the assets we need for this project. But by the time you will be watching this video, there is going to be another folder here, which is going to be the final. And that folder is going to contain the complete code for this project, okay? So for now, all I want you to do is to have access to all the assets, the images, the AVGs, everything, icons, everything we are going to need for the project, okay? The page also contains information on how you can access this folder. But you can simply click on this icon, copy this link. Once you copy this link, if you're on Windows, please open your command prompt. If you're Mac, you can simply open your terminal, okay? Great. So I am currently on my terminal. Now we can navigate to the desktop. The desktop is simply this particular part of your PC. So we CD to desktop. And currently we are here. We are on the desktop. To prove to you that we are on the desktop, we can simply create a folder. We do that using the mkdir, and we can just call this test. And you see, this is the folder here, and this shows that we are on the desktop. We can also remove that folder using rm and the folder name, which is text, okay? And because this is a directory, we can't just remove it using just rm, but we need to use this r flag, okay? So let's add the name again, and now we've removed that folder. You see that the folder has been deleted on the desktop. Good. Now that we're on our desktop, simply type git clone and paste the link you copied, okay? And hit enter. Perfect. Now, this simply gives us a copy of what we saw on the GitHub page. We have this starter folder. Inside it, we have the assets folder. Now, go to what we have. So you can close this terminal and open up this. When you open it up, you see the starter and you see these assets. Good. So now you have access to everything you need for this project. Back in our code editor, we've already created this folder, which we called assets. So let's bring it to one side, and also let's bring this to one side. Now you can open up this folder. Okay, when you open up this folder, you see three things: the SVG, the images, and this favicon icon. Okay, what we can do is to drag and drop this inside the assets. Okay, put it inside the assets. Also, we do the same thing for the image. Okay, simply drag it and drop it inside the assets. Finally, let's drag and drop this favicon icon inside the assets. Good. So let's close this. We have images, SVG, and we have our icon. Perfect. Now we can close this. So let's go back to the images. And for the source, we are going to remove this. Okay, so let's remove this. We don't need it. What we need is to link these images. So let's go to the images. This is the hero image. So we need this. We need it here. And to do that, simply press dot and backslash. Okay. So here you see these assets. Go to images and we select this hero. Save it. That's all we need. Now let's go to the second attribute, which is the auth. And remember, I told you this is very important. In here, we simply need to describe the image. Here I'm going to say a lady on a laptop and a man on the globe. Good. Now we are done with this particular hero session. Okay. So let's see what we have. Now, this is what we have. But remember the goal. The goal is to make this. So we have this now. We want to make it just to look like this. Okay. But we also have this part, this trusted by. So let's go back. So after this particular image div, at the end here, let's add another div and let's give it a class of trusted companies. Okay. So here, let's use the H2 and let's say trusted by. And now we have this particular logo, this, and this. So we can wrap these logos in a container. And I can hear you say div. Give this div a class of company logos. So in here, we can now use image. And for this source, let's go to assets. Then we use the SVG. The first one is going to be the Microsoft. And for the attribute for screen readers, let's simply say Microsoft logo. Okay. Now we can copy this twice using a shortcut. You can press or mark, you can use Shift Option and the arrow down. Okay. You can also see more of this by coming to this selection path. So on this selection tab, you see the option. So what I did now is copy line down. So copy line down following these keys. Okay. So let's change the logo here. So this is going to be Airbnb and the last one is going to be Bizel. Okay. So let's change this to Airbnb and let's change this to Bizel. And that is all for this hero session. Okay, so now we have this. Let's now go to the CSS part and make this particular hero session to look exactly like what we have on this page. So the first thing we are going to do is actually to link our CSS file with the HTML file. And we are going to do this here in the head part, okay? In this head element, we are going to add a link. We use the link element, okay? This link element is a self-closing element and it takes attributes. The first one is the rel. We are going to see the use of this because we are still going to use this for an icon. But for now, let's say this is a style sheet. And the next one is the source of that document, which we specify using the href attribute, okay? And this is going to be slash styles.css. Let's save this. Now, let's see if this is well connected. Let's grab the body. And for the body, let's give it a background color of, let's say, green and save this file. Now, let's check what we have. Good. Now you see that everything is linked correctly because our background color now is what is green. So for now, let's remove this background color. Remember, we are building a professional website. So we are going to follow some professional tips and tricks, okay, for this particular project. So first, we are going to add what we call CSS variables. So we use these CSS variables to actually set our project color theme. Okay, we're going to use the root selector, and the root selector is simply going to make these styles available globally. And here we can now specify, let's say, color, And for now, let's say primary. We set our primary color to 14A 800. So this is going to be our primary color. Next, let's add another one, color PRI BTN. So we set primary color for our button. And this is going to be 108A00. Color primary dark. And this is going to be 13544E. And in order to save our time, I'm simply going to copy the remaining colors. They are just the same approach and paste it here. Okay. So this is going to be our color theme. So we have the primary dark, have several shades of this primary color. Then we also have the gray color. So we have the gray color. And also we have several shades of our gray color. And basically we have the black and blue and then our white color. It's very simple. So you can go through this. Okay. And once you are done, we continue with the project. So another thing we can add here is the width. Okay, so here we can simply specify width and let's say this to, let's say 90%. For now, this is okay. For now, this is all we need here. Okay. Next, let's add a global reset using the universal selector. The universal selector is this particular star and it selects all the elements on the page, okay? Applying styles to every HTML element, I mean every, okay? Okay, but before we do anything here, let's go back to our web page. If you look at our web page, notice this particular space here. We have some margin, we have some padding, okay? We have some margin and some padding. So first, let's set margin. First, let's set margin. Let's set this to 0 and save it. You see what happened here? Also, let's set padding. So all the default margin and padding, we remove them, okay? And the next thing we are going to do from box model, so we set the box sizing to border box. And the next thing we are going to do now is to add what we call common styles. Common styles that is going to apply to button. So in this project, we avoid repetition of code. Okay. Remember, as a professional front-end developer, you need to write dry code. Okay. Dry code. Do not repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself. Okay. And in order to avoid that, we need what we call general styles. Now, before looking at these general styles in details, let's grab the HTML and also the body elements. Okay. We set the font family. And for now, let's use sans serif. But let's pause. Remember, this is a professional website. This is a real world website. We are building Upwork. We can't just use sans serif. For the purpose of this project, let's go back and see how we can add a more standard font, a font that is going to be available on every browser. Okay, so let's go to our browser. Here, let's simply type Google Fonts and click on this particular first option. Good, and here you are going to see several fonts. For this project, I used Roboto. So when you click on Roboto, you are going to see different font size. You are going to see italic. We don't need italic because we can use CSS to do that. Okay. When you click on this get fonts, you are going to see either this download or get embedded code. Click on get embedded code. Okay. So you can use this toggle on and off. So the thin 100, we don't need the italic. So I'm simply going to remove all the italic and I'm going to get the rest. So this is what we want. We can simply copy this at import, copy that. And here in our CSS file, okay, before this root up here, just paste it here, okay, and save this file. All right. So now let's go back here. Before the sans serif, let's add Roboto. So we add the font Roboto. Okay. Okay. Look at the text and note the change. Okay. So here we are saying that the font family is going to be Roboto. Then this is going to be the fallback. For instance, if somebody opens your project and the person is not connected, okay, the first thing the person sees, the font is going to be sans serif. But then when the person is connected to the internet, then the person is going to see this Roboto, because remember, this is coming from Google Font. Okay. Before we continue, let's see how we can add comments in our CSS file. We can add comments in CSS file using backslash star and star backslash. Okay. So this is the opening part of the comment and this is the closing part of the comment. In here, we can say CSS variables. Now here, let's just say global reset. This is going to be common styles. Before we style this hero session, let's add some common styles. For instance, we are going to have this container class. So we say dot container. And for this dot container, we want the width. We want to use this CSS variable. And to use the CSS variable, we use this var. And here we can specify the width LG. Now let's set the margin. For the margin, let's say 3.6 rem at the top, auto left and right, and 0 bottom. Okay. And now you see, and then the top we added 3.6 and down is 0. Okay. We do not add any margin down for now. Any element that has this particular class, this style is going to be applied to it automatically. So let's style all the any button that has class BTN. Let's actually style the button. Let's set the font size to 0.9 rem, increase the font width to 500. Let's change the color. So this is going to be gray 900, this particular one. Let's give it a padding, top and bottom to be 8 rem, okay? And left and right is going to be 2 rem. Padding is simply going to add space around the element. So top and bottom we set to 0.8 rem, left and right we set to 2 rem. Good. Now let's remove the border. So we set the border. So we set the border to none. Let's give it a border radius. If you look at this sharp edge. Now let's make it a bit smooth. So border radius. And let's set this to 16 pixels. And now we have this shape. Let's change the cursor. So here we have this arrow. Let's change the cursor to pointer. Now, if you place your cursor on it, you see it is now pointing. Now, let's add a transition. And this transition is going to be on the background color. So let's give it a delay of 0.3 seconds and let it be is. Okay. Now, let's add another class, which is BTN. Let's say BTN PRY, our BTN primary. Okay. Let's set the background color to var. And this is going to be the color primary BTN. Also, let's set the color. Let's use the color primary 50. Okay, let's use this. Now, this particular button, on this particular button, we want to change the background color. So we change the background color. Okay, so let's see what we have. Good. So you see that transition effect. Okay. Now let's add another one still on the button. Let's say BTN clear. And for this, we are going to set the background color to var white. Okay. So this is going to be the white color. And for this BTN clear on this, let's set the border color to the primary color. Okay. And let's also change the background color to gray. Okay. So this is going to be the color gray 100. Now let's add another class, which is logo. Let's call this logo IMG. Okay. Let's set the height to 82 pixels. And also let's set the width to 82 pixels. Let's add another class. Let's call this icon image. Okay. We simply set the width and height to 20 pixels. Now let's select all our anchor tag, all the anchor tag. Let's remove the text decoration. Let's set this to none. And let's set the color to our gray color. So that's the deepest one. Let's use gray 900. Let's also select all the list item that is going to be on this page. Okay. And let's remove the list tie. The list tie is going to be none. Let's select our H1. And for this document, we are simply going to have one H1. So let's set the font size to 4.2 rem. Let's set the font width to 500. And let's also set the color. Let's use the color main text. So we have this color main text. Perfect. Good. And for now, this is going to be our general style. We are going to be adding more to this whenever we need it. Okay. So whenever we discover that we are beginning to repeat ourselves too much, we simply use a general style. Now let's add a comment and let's call this the hero session. So let's tie this hero session without wasting any time. So let's go back to the document. So we have this session with the class of container. And remember, the container class is already applied. So the hero container contains two divs, this first one and this second one. For this, we can either use a flex box and set this to a flex container, okay? Or we use CSS grid. So basically here we say dot hero container, let's set display. So we can set display to grid and let's set the grid template columns to 1FR, 1FR and save this. And now we have this, okay? Good. Let's align items to the center. Good. Now let's tie the hero image. Okay, remember this is the container containing the image, but we want to style the image itself. So this is the container here, hero img. And now we are selecting this particular image, the image inside the container. Okay, very simple. So we set the width of the image to be 70% of its parent container. Okay, and that reduces the size of the image. And let's set the object fit to cover. Perfect. So now we have this. Now, another thing we can do is to actually check this container itself. Dot hero container. Now, let's set a background color. Let's set this to red first and see something. Okay, let's see something. Now, we can clearly see the position of the image in that container. Okay, this red background is this particular, it is this particular div. Okay, so what we can do now is to work on the position of the image. So we can set this to a flex container. And once we set this to a flex container, we can now justify content to center. Okay, let's go back. Now you see the image here. Good. Now let's remove this. We don't need it. Good. Now let's type this particular paragraph because actually we need some space here. So that should be this class. We select this class because this div contains the H1, which we already styled using the general style. So let's grab this, the paragraph inside it. Let's increase the font size to let's say 1.5 rem. Set the font width to 400. Let's change the color to, let's use the gray, color gray. Let's use 400. And let's give it some space. So we use padding, top to be 2 rem, top and bottom 2 rem, left and right 0. Good. Actually, let's change this to, let's use 600. Oh, that is better. Good. Now, let's tie this particular part, the trusted by, okay, which is this. So let's select these trusted companies. Dot trusted companies. First, let's give it margin top. We need space between two elements. I'm going to use margin. So I need space here. That's going to be margin top. Let's set this to 4.4 rem. Now let's increase the width. Let's set the width to 100% and let's display flex. Okay. Let's change the flex direction and set this to column. Good. Let's give it a gap. Let's use 0.8 rem. Good. Now let's tie the logos, the company logos. And for this, we set display to flex. Okay. We align items to the center and we simply give it a gap of, let's say, 2rem. Perfect. Let's even justify content. And here we can use flex start. Okay. If we use flex end, you see, that's going to move it to the end. But let's use flex start because that is exactly what we need. Now let's tie this H2, this trusted by H2. Okay. So that's going to be the H2 inside the trusted by. Let's set the font width to 400 and let's set the color. Here we use the gray 400. Great. Now let's see what we have. And I am really happy with what we have at the moment. And this is going to end the hero session. Now that you have finished this hero session, I would like it if you can pause, go to any website of your choice, look at their hero session and try it on your own. The goal of this project is not just to build a project and add to our portfolio. Yes, that's a good thing to do, but at the same time, being confident on working on any project on your own without following any video. Thank you for being part of this hero session. See you in the next session. Welcome back. In this video, we are going to build the talent session. Without wasting any time, let's go and see how we can build all these components step by step. So in our HTML document, we have our main. So this is our main element. And we have this first session, which is the hero session. Now, let's add another session, okay? And let's give this a class of container. So all these sessions, they are going to contain a class of container. Now, and let me show you why we need to do that. If you look at the page, from this part, you see this space here and this space here. You see the space here, this space here, all through this part. So that's why we used a general style. We used the general class, the container class, to do this instead of repeating ourselves several times. You see the importance of this? Okay. So all the section here is going to have this container class. Apart from this part, the header, this subnav, and the footer, every other thing on the page is going to have that container class. Okay. So for this particular session, we give it the class container, and also let's add another class and call it talent section. Okay. Here we can add a div to basically contain this header here. And we can reduce our stress by using some shortcut on VS Code. For instance, if I want to add a div with a class of, let's say, talent header, I can simply say div dot talent header and I will hit tab. This will simply generate a div with a class of talent header. So in here, I can now add H2. So here, let's type browse talent by category. So after this, let's add a P paragraph. We can copy this text here and paste it here. And from this page, you see that this is a link. So we can wrap this in anchor tag. Okay. And for now, let's put hash here. Also, I can put this in another container. I can use the span element for this. So the span element is a non-semantic HTML element, just the way we have div. So now we have this talent header. We can close that. And so now let's use another container for this box here. So we can say div with a class of, let's say, talent boxes. Okay. And let's add another div with a class of talent box. And inside this particular div, let's add another container with a class of talent. Here, let's add H3 and let's call this development IT. Okay. So let's simply add another div to hold this text and this text. So we can give this a div. So here we can use a div with a class of talent subtext. And inside this, let's add a div with a class of rating. let's use the image element for the star icon. Okay, so dot slash assets. Here we use SVG and let's look for star. So we use the star SVG. Here we can simply type the star icon. And after the image, we simply add a span. Okay, so here we say 4.85/5. And after this particular rating div, let's simply use a div. And here, let's say 1,853 views. If you go to the finished project, you notice that these boxes are actually the same thing. So they are the same box, but with different content. So all we can do is simply copy this from this particular part, talent box. So from this talent box, we copy this and repeat it several times. Then change the text where you have development IT. So here, where we have development IT, you replace it by AI services. You replace every other thing. You do that for everything. And when you are done, we are going to style whatsoever we have. Please, you can pause the video and do that. Good. Now you can save this file and let's go to our page. So now we have this. All we need to do now is to use CSS, transform this to this. So you begin to see the difference between HTML. So the HTML basically gives us the structure, and the beautification, we need to use CSS. So you see the beauty of CSS. So this is where we stopped in the last part, which is the hero section. Let's add another comment here. Okay. And here we can simply say talent section. Okay. Let's close this comment. Now let's go to our HTML so that we understand what we are doing actually. Now, if you look at this, it's actually becoming more difficult to read this HTML document. And for this reason, we are going to introduce what we call comments in HTML. And to add comments in our HTML file, we simply use the less than, we use the exclamation mark, and we type dash dash. This is the opening part, and this is the closing part. Here, let's simply say hero action. Good. Now let's move down. After this, let's add another comment. And for this, we say the talent. Okay. So when we come to this page now, it will be easier for us to understand which session is which. Okay. So now let's copy this class, talent session. Here we say dot talent session. Let's set display to flex. And if you save this file, you see this is the first div and this is the second div. Just for you to understand flexbox. And everything is on the same row because by default, the direction is what? Is row. Okay. So we need to change the flex direction back to column. After this project, I believe you are going to be an expert using flexbox and also CSS grid. Now let's select this first div. Let's tie the first div. We have this text here. So we say dot talent header. Let's set display to flex. And we also need to change the flex direction to column. Let's increase the font size. Let's use 1.6 rem. Okay. And now let's give it a margin bottom to separate it from those containers. So here we use 2.8 rem. Now let's type this paragraph. Okay, so that's the paragraph inside this particular div. Let's change the color. So we are going to use the color gray. Let's use 600. Good. Let's reduce the font size basically. Let's use 1.2 rem. Perfect. Now let's tie the link. This has to be green color with underline. Okay. Remember, every anchor element by default has the underline actually. Let's go back to the general styles. Okay. Because here in the general styles, we removed the text decoration. If you remove this, you see what happened. Okay. So we already reduced our stress by adding this to every anchor element that we're going to have on our page. But for this particular anchor element, we actually need the underline. Okay. We need the underline. If you go to upwork.com, you will actually see that underline there. And that's why we are going to style only this one. So we are going to select this particular talent header. Okay. Then we select the anchor link. The anchor link inside this header, we are going to change the text decoration. So we set the text decoration to underline. Okay. And now you see the underline. Great. Let's change the color. The color we are going to use our primary color. We use the primary, let's use 700. And let's change the font width. Let's set this to 400. Good. Now we have this. Next, let's tie these containers. So let's go back here. Okay, so let's tie the box itself, each box. Dot talent box. Let's actually give it a background color to see what we are doing. So we set the background color to var. Let's use gray on red. Let's give it height of, let's say, 8.4 rem. Let's give it some padding. Let's use 1.2 rem. Okay, let's give it border radius of, let's say, 8 pixels. Okay, so now we have the box. See the first one here, the second one, but they are all joined together. Okay, let's change the cursor. So let's set the cursor to pointer. So we now have this pointer. Great. Let's add transition on the background color. Let's give it a delay of 0.3 seconds. And now over on this, we now have to change the background color. So on over, we set the background color to, let's use gray 100. Okay, we use this one. Great. Now let's tie these talent boxes. And here we are going to see a very good trick of CSS grid actually. Let's set the display to grid. Okay. And for the grid templates columns, we are going to use the repeat function, and it's going to be auto fit. We use the min max function. Set. Now we have this. For now, let's set a gap. Let's give it a gap, which stands for the short end of column gap and row gap. For this, let's set it to 2 rem. And now we have this. Very simple. And the beauty of this is when you expand this, it's going to fit into any device. You don't have to worry yourself about the responsiveness of this part again. So this is very, very beautiful, and it makes the work very simple. The only thing we have to do now is just to style the content here. Good. Now over on this, this should be primary actually, PRY 100. So that when we over on this, we now have this. Okay, good. Let's go back to the HTML. Let's select this class, this container, okay, and style what we have here. Dot talent. Let's set the display to flex. Okay, let's change the flex direction, and this should be column. And let's add some gap, 1.2 rem. Now we have that. Let's tie the H3 inside the talent. So the talent H3 inside it. Let's change the font size to 1.4 rem. Let's increase the font width to 700. And let's change the color to our gray 900. Perfect. So we are done styling the H3. Now let's tie this talent subtext, which contains the rating. Okay, let's go. Dot talent subtext. We set display to flex. Let's justify content to flex start. Let's give this a gap of 2 rem. Okay, now let's tie this image. So dot talent img. Let's reduce the width and the height to 16 pixels, and also the height to 16 pixels. Great. So here, let's align items to the center also. Perfect. So now we have this. In this session, we've seen how we can create any component of this form using simple CSS tricks and tips. Thank you for being part of this session, and see you in the next one. Welcome back. In this video, we are going to build this header part. So basically, we are going to build the header and also the subnav part. Let's go. For this part, we are going to use the header element. Okay, so let's go back here. Inside this header element, let's add the nav semantic element. So we use the nav, and we are using navigation nav because these are actually navigations. They are links. Okay, Here, let's add the container, and we are going to give this a class of header left container. So what we are going to do is to use a div for everything we have here, and also another div for everything we have here. So we call this part the left, and we call this part the right. Okay. Let's add the second div, and this will give it a class of header right container. And now let's work inside this first one. So first, let's add a div and give this a class of our logo container. So let's call it the main logo container. And here, let's simply add an image, and we go to our assets, and this is going to be under the SVG. So let's use the logo. For the auth, let's call this Upwork logo. After the image container, let's now use an another list for every other thing. And for this another list, let's give it a class of list header left. And here, our list items, let's give them a class of list item header left. Okay. And inside this, let's add our anchor element. For now, let's put hash here. Inside this anchor element, let's add find talent. Okay. Which is this first one. This first one, find talent. And we are going to add this icon. So find talent. And after this anchor tag, let's add img. And for this, we are going to use the SVG. So it's going to be under SVG, the drop down SVG. The auth, this should be drop down icon. Let's save this and go to the page. So this is our page. We now have this. So one thing we can do is to reduce the size. And remember, we have the general class for all the icons. So we call it icon img. And also for this image, we have a general class for logo img. Okay, logo img. Now, if you go to the page now, you now have this. Great. So the next thing we are going to do is to add the remaining ones. So if you look at this, these are actually the same thing. So we can just copy and paste. So go to this list, this particular list here. You can just copy it from here to here. Copy and paste, find work. And the last one, which does not have this drop down, this is simply going to be enterprise. Okay, so we are done with this left part. Let's now move on to this right part. And for the right part, we are going to add a container that is simply going to contain the input. So let's go to the finished project. We have this input here. Okay, so we add a container to contain this input. Then we have our buttons. Let's go straight there. So we say div with a class of grouped input. So here, let's add another div with a class of header input. Now let's add our input element. We simply use input. The input element is a self-closing element. Okay, but the input element accepts some important attributes. The first one is the type. So we need to specify the type of input field we are adding. Here, let's say search. And the next attribute is the placeholder, which is the text we are simply going to see in the input field. Okay, so let's save this now and see what we have. You see, now we have this. You see, this is the search. Good. So let's add another container, which is going to contain the input icons. So let's say input. And in here, let's add the search icon. So this should be to access our SVG. And let's use the search SVG. In the auth, let's simply say search icon. Okay. And remember, let's give this the class of icon img. Do you see the importance of the general class? The general style is very important. Okay. Let's save this. Now, after this grouped input, okay. So basically here, let's add another div with a class of, let's say, header input. This is going to take two classes. So I'm going to use dot and dot again. And the second class name is header input small. So that is actually for this particular one, this one here. Okay, for this. Good. So let's add our input field again. Okay, and there is also this shortcut. You can type input and specify the type of the input field. For instance, if you say search and hit tab, so it's going to create an input field with the type search. We don't need all these attributes. The input field also takes so many other attributes. So all we need here is to add the placeholder, and this we are going to call jobs. And after this, let's add a div and give it a class of small input icon. Okay. And here, let's add img, our image, and go to assets, go to svg, and this is going to be the drop down svg. And for the auth, let's simply say drop down icon. Let's add another div which is going to contain the buttons. Okay, so let's call this header actions button, and let's simply add the button here. Here, let's say log in, and this button, let's give it a class of btn and another class of btn clear. Remember the general class we have, and let's give it another class of btn login. Now let's add a container here with a class of btn sign up. So let's say sign up container, and in here let's add another button, and here we say sign up. And for this, we also give it the class, the general btn, btn primary, and also btn header sign up. So we have this. Okay, for this icon, let's go back the drop down. Here this should be icon img. Okay, there is an hyphen there. And also here, let's give this a class of icon img. Good. Let's save the file, and now we have this. So the next thing we want to do is to now use CSS and transform this to this. Okay, so let's go straight and do that.